Chapter 5. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Laura moved through the house like a ghost, her skin crawling with anxiety, her stomach in constant knots. Every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, her heart leaped into her throat. Was it a messenger with a telegram? Had word come? Or was it just another servant going about their duties, oblivious to the fact that their young mistress was slowly unraveling like a poorly stitched seam? The house itself had transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Her mother was in her element, directing the preparations for the announcement ball with the precision of a general marshaling troops. Seamstresses came and went in a parade of measuring tapes and fabric swatches. Florists presented arrangements of hothouse roses and lilies. The cook was testing recipes for the elaborate supper that would be served: duck confit, oysters on the half-shell, champagne aspic that wobbled like pale gold jelly. "The engagement will be announced at the ball," her mother had informed her 3 days after that horrible dinner. Constance had been standing in Laura's doorway, backlit by the hallway lamps, her silhouette sharp and unyielding. "Your father and Mr. Ledgehopper have reached an understanding. The wedding will take place in June, before the summer heat becomes unbearable." June. Less than 3 months away. Laura had nodded mutely, unable to trust her voice. Her mother had taken her silence for maidenly modesty and swept from the room in a rustle of taffeta, leaving behind the scent of lavender and the weight of inevitability. If the telegram doesn't come, Laura thought for the 100th time, if Silverstone doesn't respond, I'll have to run anyway. I'll go to Boston or New York and find work as a governess or a shop girl. I'll change my name. But she knew these were the desperate fantasies of a trapped animal. A senator's daughter couldn't simply disappear into anonymity. Her father had too many connections, too much reach, and what respectable family would hire a governess who had run away from home? What shop would employ a girl with no references, no experience, no explanation for her circumstances? The telegram was her only real hope. And with each passing day, that hope felt more and more like a fool's dream. The park outing had been her mother's idea. "You should spend time with the children," Constance had said over breakfast on Saturday morning, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Get to know them before the wedding. They'll be your responsibility soon enough." Laura had stared at her mother across the white linen cloth top, at the delicate china cups filled with steaming coffee, at the perfectly arranged plate of buttered toast and marmalade. "Must I?" she'd asked quietly. Her father had looked up from his newspaper, his expression stern. "It's already arranged. Mr. Ledgehopper will meet you at Riverside Park at 2. You'll be chaperoned by your maid, of course." Of course, because propriety had to be maintained, even as they sold her to a man old enough to be her father. Betsy had accompanied her in the carriage, sitting across from Laura in her gray servant's dress, her round face worried. Betsy was only 22, just 4 years older than Laura, and they'd grown up together. Betsy starting as a scullery maid when she was 12, Laura the spoiled only child who'd sneaked down to the kitchen to steal cookies and gossip with the staff. "Are you all right, Miss Laura?" Betsy had asked, as the carriage rattled toward the park, her chin dipped, turning her eyes into shadowed pools of concern. "I'm fine," Laura lied, clutching her reticule so tightly her knuckles went white. Inside the small beaded bag was a handkerchief, a few coins, and, hidden in the lining, the carefully folded newspaper clipping and a copy of her letter to John Silverstone. She'd made Betsy swear to secrecy about the letter, and the girl had agreed, though her eyes had been wide with concern. "You won't tell anyone," Laura had pressed. "If a telegram comes for me, you'll bring it directly to me, not to Mother or Father." "I promise, miss, on my honor." Betsy had squeezed her hand. "But are you sure this is wise? A man you've never met, all the way in New Mexico territory?" "It can't be worse than Ledgehopper," Laura had whispered. Now, as the carriage pulled up to Riverside Park, Laura wished she'd stayed home and faced whatever punishment her parents would have devised. The park was lovely in the spring sunshine, weeping willows draping their branches over the Potomac, flower beds bursting with tulips and daffodils in shades of crimson, butter yellow, and cream. Couples strolled along the gravel paths, and children played near the fountain, their laughter carrying on the breeze. And there, near a cluster of oak trees, stood Ivan Ledgehopper with his 5 children. Laura's stomach dropped. The oldest was a boy of 8, tall for his age and gangly, with his father's rust-brown hair and a mean set to his mouth. The next 3 were boys as well, ages 5, 4, and 2, each one a smaller, grubbier version of the one before. They were dressed in knickers and jackets, but already the youngest boys had dirt on their knees and faces. The baby, 8 months, was held by a tired-looking nursemaid, a girl barely older than Betsy, with a flour-sack dress and haunted eyes. "Miss Ashworth," Ledgehopper called out, his voice booming across the park. Several people turned to look. "Come, come, meet your future family."
Laura forced herself to walk forward, Betsy trailing behind her. She was wearing a walking dress of pale lavender silk with cream lace at the collar and cuffs, her hair pinned up beneath a matching hat. She'd taken extra care with her appearance that morning, armor against the ordeal ahead. "Children, this is Miss Laura Ashworth, who will soon be your new mother." Ledgehopper beamed as if he were presenting a prize. "Laura, these are my boys, William, Charles, Henry, and little Theodore. And this," he gestured to the baby, "is Beatrice, named for her poor departed mother." The boys stared at her with identical expressions of calculation. William, the oldest, smiled slowly, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Pleased to meet you," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She talks funny," Charles announced, "like she's got a stick up her—" "Charles!" Ledgehopper's voice cracked like a whip. "Mind your manners." But he was smiling indulgently, as if the boy's rudeness were somehow charming. The afternoon descended into chaos almost immediately. The boys had no interest in polite conversation or gentle park activities. William suggested they play a game near the fountain, and before Laura could protest, she was surrounded by running, shrieking children. Charles accidentally bumped into her, causing her to stumble into Henry, who had conveniently positioned himself near a muddy patch. Her hem dragged through the mud, the pale lavender silk turning a sickly brown. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Miss Ashworth," Charles said, his voice dripping with false contrition. "I didn't see you there." "It's quite all right," Laura managed, her face burning as other park visitors stared. Theodore, the 2-year-old, had a piece of chewing gum that he'd been working on for what must have been hours. When Laura bent down to adjust her muddy skirts, he reached up with sticky fingers and grabbed a handful of her hair, the gum transferring from his mouth to her carefully styled waves. "Oh no, Miss Laura," Betsy gasped, trying to untangle the mess, but the gum was thoroughly embedded, and the more they pulled, the worse it became. Ledgehopper watched all of this with detached amusement, offering no help. "Boys will be boys," he said with a shrug. "You'll get used to it." The nursemaid, looking desperate, thrust baby Beatrice into Laura's arms. "I need to use the necessary, ma'am, just for a moment." Before Laura could protest, the girl fled, and Laura was left holding a squirming, fussing infant who smelled distinctly of sour milk and worse. The baby's diaper was clearly wet. Laura could feel the dampness seeping through the child's gown and onto her own lap. She tried to hold the baby away from her body, but Beatrice began to wail, her face turning red and scrunched. "Bounce her," Ledgehopper suggested, unhelpfully. "She likes to be bounced." Laura bounced awkwardly, and the baby's wailing intensified. Then, with a horrible gurgling sound, Beatrice spit up, a stream of curdled milk that splattered down the back of Laura's dress, soaking into the silk and dripping onto the bench. The smell was overwhelming: sour milk, wet diaper, and beneath it all something else that Laura didn't want to identify. She felt her gorge rise and had to swallow hard against the nausea. The boys, delighted by this turn of events, began to laugh and point. "She's got baby sick on her," William crowed. "Look at Miss Fancy Britches. She's covered in baby sick." "Puddles!" Henry shouted gleefully. "Princess Puddles! She's got puddles everywhere, mud puddles and pea puddles." The nickname caught on immediately, and within moments all 4 boys were chanting it. "Princess Puddles! Princess Puddles! Princess Puddles!" Laura felt tears burning in her eyes. Her dress was ruined, mud on the hem, gum in her hair, a wet spot spreading across her lap, baby vomit down her back, and the children circling her like wolves, their taunts growing louder and crueler. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking, but they didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder, dancing just out of reach, chanting their horrible nickname. "Bet she cries like a little baby," Charles said. "Bet she runs home to her mama. Princess Puddles is gonna cry like a little baby." Ledgehopper finally intervened, but even then his voice held more amusement than reproach. "Boys, boys, that's no way to treat your new mother. Apologize to Miss Ashworth." They mumbled apologies that were clearly insincere, still smirking at each other. When the nursemaid finally returned and took the baby shrieking back, Laura stood on trembling legs. "I'm afraid I must go," she said, her voice barely controlled. "I'm unwell." Of course, of course." Ledgehopper kissed her hand, seemingly oblivious to her distress. "We'll do this again soon. The children need to get accustomed to you." Never, Laura thought as she fled toward the waiting carriage, Betsy hurrying beside her. In the carriage, with the door safely closed and horses pulling away from the park, Laura finally let the tears come. They streamed down her face, hot and bitter, while Betsy held her hand and made soothing noises. "It's all right, miss. It's all right." But it wasn't all right. Nothing was all right.